He didn't throw her out with shouting. He did something colder. He changed the locks while she was at work and left her a text that said, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." That was the first line of the end. The second came when Emma stood on the front steps of the little rental house with a grocery bag cutting into her fingers and watched the smoke from her own kitchen drift through the open window, where Daniel's new girlfriend stood barefoot in Emma's old slippers, sipping coffee from the mug Emma had bought on their 10th anniversary. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below, and if you believe dignity is the strongest revenge, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to her story. Emma said nothing. She only set the grocery bag down on the porch, one slow movement, as if any sudden motion might break the last piece of her composure. The air smelled like rain on pavement and burned toast. Inside, Daniel laughed at something on his phone, a bright, careless sound that used to mean home. Now it sounded like a stranger borrowing the furniture. 8 years of marriage had trained Emma to read the room before she entered it. Tonight, she read the humiliation immediately. The new woman leaned against the counter with a satisfied little smile, like she had won a prize nobody else wanted. Daniel didn't look at Emma for more than a second. His gaze moved over her plain work blouse, the sensible shoes, the tired line around her mouth, and settled into that familiar expression of disappointment he used to wear whenever she asked for more than silence. "You forgot your key," he said, as if that explained everything. As if the old life had simply slipped from her hands and landed somewhere unimportant. Emma remembered the version of herself who used to wait up late with dinner covered in foil, who believed love meant patience, sacrifice meant virtue, and staying meant loyalty. She remembered the day she signed the mortgage papers with her own name tucked quietly under his, the day she skipped the promotion interview because he said the commute would be too hard on the family, the day she stopped wearing lipstick because he said it was too much. Those memories sat in her chest like stones. But tonight, one small, clean truth moved through the weight of them. She was done carrying a house that no longer carried her. She picked up the grocery bag again, turned, and walked back down the steps without asking for an explanation, without raising her voice, without giving him the satisfaction of watching her break. Her heels clicked softly against the concrete, each step steadier than the last. Across the street, a porch light flicked on in the gathering dusk. Someone had just come home to a warm house, a lit kitchen, a life with room in it. Emma paused at the curb and looked back once. Daniel was still standing in the doorway, still pretending he had power over the shape of the evening. He had no idea that the text in her phone was already open, the number of her lawyer already saved, and the first appointment to protect her future already set for Monday morning at 9 o'clock. The first morning after the lockout was quiet in a way Emma had almost forgotten existed. No raised voice from the hallway. No slammed cabinet doors. No sharp commentary cutting through the air before coffee. Just the low hiss of the kettle in the small apartment she had rented 2 weeks ago, the soft glow of dawn slipping through thin curtains, and the sound of her own footsteps moving through a kitchen that belonged to no one but her. She stood at the counter in an old gray sweater, hair still damp from the shower, and stared at the chipped mug in her hand as if it were something fragile and sacred. For years, mornings had been measured by Daniel's mood. One wrong glance, one delayed reply, one unopened email, and the whole day could turn cold. But this morning, the silence did not feel empty. It felt earned. On the table beside the toaster sat a legal pad, a pen, and a printed list with neat, practical lines. Rent, utilities, child pickup schedule, work shifts, groceries. Her life was smaller now in ways people like to call tragic. A one-bedroom apartment, a second-hand couch, part-time hours at the community office 3 afternoons a week. But small did not mean broken. Small could mean precise. Small could mean yours. Emma wrapped both hands around the mug and watched steam rise in a pale ribbon. Her phone buzzed once. A message from her sister. "Did you sleep?" Emma looked at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Better than I have in years." It was such a simple sentence that it startled her. Years. She had spent years shrinking herself around Daniel's temper, years swallowing the urge to say no, years making herself quieter so the room would not split open. Now she was learning the shape of her own voice again in the middle of ordinary things. The scrape of a chair, the rhythm of her breath, the click of a calendar being filled in for herself. At 9:15, She sat at the tiny desk by the window and opened her laptop. The attorney she had called yesterday had already sent a draft of her separation agreement. There were lines to review, documents to sign, records to gather. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make a stranger cry or a room go still. Just paper. Just facts. Just the patient work of drawing a boundary strong enough to hold. By noon, she was at the bus stop with her tote bag on one shoulder and a folder tucked under her arm, watching mothers in puffy coats usher children towards school, watching men in work boots carry coffee and keys in the day ahead. No one looked at her twice. That anonymity, once humiliating, now felt like mercy. At the community office, fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, and the smell of fresh paper and stale coffee drifted through the hall. Emma took her seat at the front desk and answered phones, filed forms, and helped an elderly woman complete a housing application. It was not glamorous. It was not the life Daniel had mocked as temporary and beneath her potential. But when the woman thanked her with trembling hands and a relieved smile, Emma felt something steady settle in her chest. Useful, present, needed. The kind of worth that did not vanish when a man looked away. That evening, she picked up her son from after-school care and found him balanced on the curb, backpack too large for his small frame, cheeks red from the cold. He ran to her before she had fully stepped out of the car. Emma knelt, gathered him close, and breathed in the clean, familiar scent of winter air and pencil shavings. "Mom, are we going home now?" he asked. She brushed his hair back with her thumb and smiled. "Yes," she said. "We are." It was only 2 words, but they landed like a promise. No explanation, no apology, no permission needed. As they drove through the city, the streetlights came on one by one, soft amber circles reflected in the windshield. Emma caught her own face in the glass and did not look away. Tired, yes. Scared a little, but also upright. Also here. And somewhere beneath the fear, under the paperwork and the part-time shifts and the carefully rebuilt hours of her day, a new thought had begun to take root. She was not waiting to be rescued. She was becoming unshakable. The third morning after the lockout came in pale and silver, with a weak winter sun pressing against the apartment windows and turning the cheap glass into something almost soft. Emma stood at the sink with a mug of black coffee warming both hands, her son's backpack by the door, his lunch already packed in a brown paper bag beside his shoes. The routine was still new enough to feel fragile, like something that could slip if she moved too fast. But it was hers now. Her alarm had gone off before dawn. She had risen without waking to anyone else's mood. She had checked her bank balance, paid the electric bill, and answered a message from the clinic where she worked part-time 3 afternoons a week. Small things. Honest things. They did not look like freedom from the outside, but to Emma they felt like the first stones in a road she could finally trust. Her phone buzzed on the counter. For a moment she expected the old habit to reach for her nerves, the instinct that every message might be a problem she had to absorb alone. Instead, she saw a name she knew, and her shoulders tightened in a different way. Daniel, her ex-husband. She did not open it right away. She let it sit there while steam rose from her mug and the apartment stayed quiet around her. Then she read the text once, slowly, with her thumb resting still against the screen. It was brief, almost casual, as if he had decided that his silence had lasted long enough to become a gesture of power. He wanted to talk. He said he could stop by after work. He said they should keep things simple for their son. There was no apology in it. No real acknowledgement of the locks, the box of her things left by the door, the way he had tried to make her feel like a guest in the life she had helped build. Just that old practiced tone, smooth on the surface and empty underneath. Emma stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then she set the phone down and took one slow breath through her nose. The air smelled faintly of coffee, detergent, and the clean cold drifting in from the cracked window. She looked at her reflection in the dark microwave door. Tired eyes, bare face, a woman in a sweater that had seen better winters. And yet she did not feel small. A knock came at the door a few minutes later, sharp and impatient. Her son was already on his way out with his shoes half-tied, scarf hanging crooked around his neck. Emma moved to the door before the second knock could land. She opened it to find Daniel standing there with his coat still buttoned, his jaw set in that careful expression he wore when he wanted to seem reasonable in front of witnesses. He glanced past her shoulder, taking in the apartment in one quick sweep, as if inventorying what had changed and what had not. His eyes paused on the lunch bag, the backpack, the plain table by the window. "You are really doing this," he said, like the words themselves were a disappointment to him. Emma did not step aside. She kept one hand on the door and the other resting lightly against the frame, her body making a line he could not cross without permission. "Yes," she said, not loud, not shaking, just clear enough to land. He gave a short, humorless smile, the kind that used to make her second-guess herself for hours. "You could have made this easier." She looked at him for a long second, not with anger, but with the stillness that comes after too much pain and too many late nights learning how to name it. "I am making it honest," she said. For the first time, he had nothing ready. He shifted his weight, glanced toward their son, and found a child who was suddenly very interested in his own shoelaces. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was worse than that. It was final. Emma picked up the backpack from the floor and handed it to her son. "Time to go," she said softly. He nodded and stepped around her, careful not to touch Daniel on the way out. Daniel watched them both, his face tightening as if he had expected something else. A plea, a confession, a crack in the wall. Instead, he got a closed door and a woman who no longer looked to him for permission to breathe. Emma met his eyes one last time, calm as winter light. Then she closed the door between them, not with force, but with the certainty of someone choosing peace over permission. The first weeks after the lockout did not feel like triumph. They felt like breath returning to lungs that had been tight for so long. Emma learned the small sounds of her own life again. The click of her apartment door opening without fear, the low hum of the refrigerator at dawn, the soft scrape of a spoon against a mug while coffee darkened the kitchen with its bitter smell. The days were still narrow, measured by school drop-off, work shifts, and the quiet math of bills laid out on the table beside a half-finished grocery list. But in that narrowness, she found something she had not had in years. Room. She began waking before her alarm, not because of dread, but because her body no longer expected a voice in the hallway or a criticism waiting at the breakfast counter. She folded laundry with the window open. She stood by the sink and let morning light rest on her hands. She answered emails for her part-time administrative job from the corner of the public library, where the air smelled like paper, dust, and old wood polish. It was not glamorous. It was not dramatic. But it was hers, and that alone made it feel sacred. Daniel still tried to keep his distance in the way men often do when they are used to being obeyed. He sent practical messages about their son with no greeting, no apology, just a tone that assumed she would answer because she always had. Emma answered only what mattered. She did not argue. She did not explain herself. She did not offer him the emotional labor he had spent years taking for granted. And that silence began to change the shape of everything. On Wednesday afternoon, she stood in line at the neighborhood cafe with her cardigan buttoned to the top and her son's school pickup note folded in her coat pocket. The barista called her name, and for a strange second, the simple sound felt like an identity being returned to her. She took her coffee to a small table by the window and opened her notebook, the one she had started carrying everywhere, and wrote down the week's expenses with steady hands. Rent, groceries, after-school care, gas. The numbers were never pretty, but they were honest. Honesty had become its own form of dignity. By the end of the second week, she had built a rhythm from ordinary things. Wake, work, pick up her son, make dinner, read one chapter at the kitchen table while the dishwasher hummed softly in the background. Some nights, she sat in the living room after he was asleep and listened to the radiator tick in the walls, a small mechanical reminder that even broken things could still make heat. She was learning that survival was not a single brave moment. It was repetition. It was choosing not to collapse when nobody was clapping. It was standing in the middle of an unremarkable Tuesday and realizing she no longer flinched at the quiet. Then, one Thursday evening, while she was sorting mail under the yellow light above the counter, she found a cream-colored envelope tucked between a utility bill and a flyer from the school. No return address. Only her name, written in clean black ink with the kind of careful handwriting that suggested time had been spent on it. Emma looked at it for a long second before opening it. Inside was an invitation to a community development forum downtown, followed by a note from a legal aid organization she had contacted weeks earlier, offering an introductory consultation and a seat at the event if she wanted to attend. Her fingers tightened around the paper. It was not a rescue. It was not a miracle. It was simply an opening, a door cracked just enough to let possibility in. Emma read the note twice, then again, as if repetition could make her less afraid of what came next. Her son wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and she folded the letter before he could ask questions. "What is it?" he mumbled. She looked at the envelope, then at the calendar on the refrigerator, where school events and work shifts were already marked in careful black ink. "Something important," she said softly. That night, after he was asleep, she laid out a navy dress on the bed. It was modest, well-made, and chosen years ago for a version of her life that still believed in appearances. She touched the fabric with her fingertips, then reached past it to the simple pearl earrings she had not worn in so long she had almost forgotten owning them. Tomorrow would not be a fight. Not yet. It would be something quieter, and perhaps more dangerous to the old life she had left behind. Because the woman who used to shrink had begun to understand a new truth. Boundaries did not make her difficult. They made her free. The letter had arrived on a Thursday, tucked inside a plain white envelope with no return address and no apology. Emma had left it unopened on the kitchen table until evening, when the apartment had gone quiet and the last gold light from the window had thinned into gray. By then, Noah was on his way, and the silence around her felt less like loneliness than the space before weather changes. She slid a finger beneath the seal and unfolded the page with careful hands. The words inside were not dramatic. They did not need to be. They were legal, precise, and quietly devastating in the way only facts could be. Her former husband had filed to challenge the new custody schedule. He wanted more time. He wanted changes. He wanted, once again, to decide what her life should look like. Emma read the letter once, then twice, her face still and unreadable, while the apartment held its breath around her. The coffee on the counter had gone cold. The little lamp near the sink cast a soft amber pool over the paper, making the typed lines seem even more official, even more final. When Noah arrived, he did not walk in like a savior. He never did. He came in carrying a folder under one arm and a paper bag from the bakery downstairs in the other, his expression calm, his presence steady, as if the world had not been trying to rearrange itself around her all week. He set the bag on the counter and glanced at the envelope in her hand. "That from him?" he asked, not with curiosity, but with a quiet understanding that made her shoulders loosen by a fraction. She nodded once. Noah did not take the letter from her. He only reached for the chair across from her and sat down, placing the folder on the table between them. Inside were copies of her work schedule, the school calendar, notes from the counselor, and the simple, patient structure of a life built to protect a child and the woman raising him. No drama, no spectacle, just proof. Emma looked at the pages, then at the man across from her, and for a moment she felt the old instinct to apologize for taking up space. But it passed. He had never asked her to be smaller. That was what had made his kindness so hard to distrust. He spoke in a low voice, measured and clear, about next steps, about keeping everything documented, about not answering in anger. "He is counting on you to react," Noah said, folding his hands loosely. "If you stay calm, he loses the story he is trying to tell." The sentence settled in the room like a match struck in darkness, small but bright enough to change everything. Emma stared at the letter again, and this time what she saw was not only trouble. She saw a pattern. Years of being pushed, pressed, corrected, and made to feel grateful for whatever space remained. She saw how much of her life had been spent answering someone else's urgency. And she saw, with a strange and quiet clarity, that she did not have to do it anymore. That night, after Noah left, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied her own reflection under the soft overhead light. The woman looking back at her was tired, not defeated, tired in the honest way of someone who had carried too much for too long. She brushed one hand over the simple navy dress hanging on the closet door, then picked up the pearl earrings and held them in her palm. Tomorrow's meeting would not require her to raise her voice. It would not require tears. It would require something harder. Composure. She placed the earrings back in their box, closed the lid, and rested both hands on the dresser until the trembling in her fingers eased. Outside, the street was washed in winter blue, and somewhere below, a car passed with its headlights briefly gliding across the walls. Emma listened to the sound fade, then exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long time, she was not waiting for the next blow. She was preparing to stand still when it came. The morning of the meeting arrived with a hard white light that made every surface in Emma's apartment look more honest than she felt. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft click of the kettle and the faint rustle of paper as she checked her notes one last time. Noah stood by the counter in a pressed shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms, reading the agenda with the calm concentration of a man who never wasted words. He did not tell her she had nothing to fear. He knew better than that. Instead, he set a mug of tea beside her hand and said, "You already know what you are going to say." Emma looked down at the cup, then at her reflection in the dark window above the sink. Tired eyes, steady shoulders. A woman who had learned how to stand inside her own life without asking for space. The folder on the table held copies of the lease, the written schedule, and the document Noah's office had helped her prepare, all clipped together with careful precision. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just proof. Her phone lit up once with a message from her former husband, short and careless, asking if she was really planning to make this difficult. Emma read it, then locked the screen without replying. The old version of her would have answered right away, trying to explain, trying to soften the edges of her own need. That woman was gone now, not in anger, but in practice. She had discovered that peace could be maintained the same way a house was kept in winter. By closing the windows, by tending the heat, by refusing to let every draft become a crisis. When she left the apartment, the air outside carried the clean bite of January and the distant sound of traffic moving through downtown. Noah held the door for her without ceremony, and together they walked to the car parked along the curb. The city moved around them in its usual hurry, but Emma felt strangely outside of it, as if she had stepped into a quieter current that belonged only to her now. During the drive, she watched storefronts blur past in silver and brick and cold glass. A florist was setting out white roses in front of a shop. Two men in wool coats argued over coffee on the corner. Somewhere a bus sighed to a stop. Ordinary life continued, indifferent and steady, and for the first time that felt comforting instead of cruel. By the time they reached the building, Emma could already see the glass doors, the polished lobby, the familiar shape of the conference room lights waiting behind them. Her ex-husband's company had arranged the meeting with all the casual confidence of people who believed they still controlled the room. But control, she had learned, was often just a costume people wore until the truth asked them to leave it behind. Noah turned off the engine and glanced at her once, his expression unreadable except for the smallest hint of reassurance. "Ready?" he asked. Emma looked at the building, then at the file in her lap. She thought of the silent mornings, the paid bills, the part-time shifts, the dinners eaten in peace, the long evenings when she had sat by the window and rebuilt herself without applause. Then she closed her hand over the folder and nodded. "Yes," she said, and for the first time, the word did not tremble. The conference room looked expensive in the way old power always did, all glass, pale marble, and quiet certainty. A long table stretched beneath a row of recessed lights, and every chair seemed to face the same invisible center of gravity, the belief that the people in this room still mattered more than the ones they had hurt. Emma stepped in beside Noah, and for one brief second, the room did what rooms like this always did when it saw someone it had once overlooked. It measured her. It weighed her coat, her posture, the calm set of her mouth. It tried to decide whether she belonged here. Across the table, her ex-husband already looked prepared to win before anyone had spoken. His tie was perfect, his smile rehearsed, his hands resting on the table like he owned the air between them. The woman beside him, dressed in a bright designer blouse and a practiced smile, leaned close enough to look possessive without touching him. Emma did not react. She only set her folder down, folded her hands lightly, and waited. That was the first thing that unsettled him. He had expected nerves, apology, maybe even a hint of anger he could use to make her appear unreasonable. Instead, she looked like a woman who had already survived the worst hour of her life and had no intention of renting it out again. Her ex-husband let out a soft laugh and leaned back in his chair. "I did not expect you to come," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Given how sensitive these things can be for you." A few people around the table smiled in that uncomfortable way people smile when they want to belong to the stronger side. Emma heard the old version of herself stir for 1 second, The woman who used to explain, soften, and absorb. Then the feeling passed. She met his eyes without blinking. "You invited me," she said simply. Not sharp, not pleading, just true. Noah stood beside her, calm as still water, one hand resting loosely at his side. He did not interrupt. He did not rescue. He only remained there, steady enough to remind the room that Emma was not alone. Her ex glanced at him, then back at her, his smile tightening by a fraction. "We are here to discuss the schedule," he said. "The children need stability, and that means consistency." Emma almost smiled at the word stability coming from a man who had made chaos feel like a household routine. Instead, she opened her folder and placed a neatly typed page on the table. Her notes were simple: school pickup times, holiday rotations, medical appointments, emergency contacts. The practical map of a life rebuilt with no drama and no audience. "I agree," she said. "That is exactly why I brought this." The room shifted. No one expected the quiet woman to arrive with structure instead of emotion. No one expected her to be ready. Her ex-husband flipped through the page, his expression changing as he realized there was nothing to attack. No tears, no accusations, no loose thread he could pull until she unraveled in public. Just a clean plan, written in black ink, holding its shape. The woman beside him gave a small, impatient sigh. "This is unnecessary," she said. "We are all adults here." Emma looked at her for the first time, and the glance was so calm it felt colder than anger. "Then act like one," she said. The words landed softly, but they landed. A couple of people looked down at the table. Someone shifted in their seat. Her ex-husband's jaw tightened, and for the first time since she walked in, he looked unsure of the script. Noah reached into his briefcase and set down one more document, this one marked with tabs and signatures. "I reviewed the arrangement from a legal and financial standpoint," he said, his voice even. "It is balanced, enforceable, and in the children's best interest." That was when the room changed completely. Balance was a word people like Emma's ex had never respected until it stood in front of them wearing expensive shoes and an unreadable face. He looked at the paper, then at Noah, and something in him finally began to recognize what he had missed before. This was not a woman begging to be chosen. This was a woman who had already chosen herself. Emma did not raise her voice. She did not gloat. She simply sat there in the filtered daylight, composed and unshaken, while the room around her learned that silence could carry more authority than any argument. And in that quiet, something irreversible settled into place. The man who once controlled every conversation was no longer the one deciding how this story would end. The room had not recovered from Noah's calm yet. The papers were still spread across the table, neat and merciless in their order, and the silence that followed his explanation seemed to press against the glass walls like weather. Emma sat with her hands folded in her lap, her posture steady, her face unreadable, but inside, something old and brittle kept trying to rise. Not fear. Not anymore. Just the familiar ache of being looked at as if she had once been small enough to dismiss. Across from her, her ex-husband stared at the folder in front of him as though it had changed shape while he was not looking. It was not the numbers that unsettled him. It was the simple fact that no one in the room was speaking to Emma the way they used to. No one was cutting over her words. No one was smiling with that thin, patronizing patience people reserved for women they had already decided to underestimate. Noah did not fill the silence. He let it work. When he finally spoke again, his voice remained level, almost gentle. He explained the timeline, the custodial schedule, the tuition account, the house agreement, every detail written with the kind of care that made arguments feel suddenly childish. Emma watched her ex's jaw tighten at each line, watched the woman beside him glance down at the documents, and then quickly look away, as if looking too long might reveal her own part in all of this. The mediator asked if there were any objections. For a moment, no one answered. The air in the room felt expensive and thin, like it had been filtered through money and regret. Then her ex gave a short laugh, the kind that tried to disguise discomfort as confidence. He said something about how everything seemed very formal now, very unnecessary, as if a family could be arranged like a contract and still call itself civilized. But even as he spoke, the old power in his tone had a hollow ring to it. Emma did not flinch. She only reached for the water glass in front of her and took a slow sip, the movement small, composed, final. Noah turned one page and slid it toward the center of the table. There was nothing dramatic in the gesture. No raised voice, no triumphant announcement. Just a clean line drawn in black ink. "This is the boundary," he said quietly. "It protects the children, it protects the agreement, and it protects Emma." The words landed with a force that had nothing to do with volume. Emma felt them settle through her like warm light through a window. Her ex looked from the page to her face, and for the first time, there was no performance left in him strong enough to hide the truth. She was not asking permission anymore. She was not offering herself up to be negotiated into less. She had entered the room with her future already organized, already signed, already standing on its own. Outside the glass, the afternoon had turned bright and indifferent, the kind of light that revealed everything without apology. Emma kept her eyes on the documents, on the careful rows of ink, on the life that had been rebuilt one quiet decision at a time. The woman he had once ignored was no longer waiting to be understood. She was too busy being clear. By the time the courthouse steps emptied and the late afternoon light turned the stone a pale gold, Emma no longer felt the familiar urge to fold inward and disappear. She stood beside Noah with her coat clasped neatly at the waist, the city moving around them in a blur of horns, footsteps, and distant sirens, while behind her the last of the hearing dissolved into quiet. Her ex had left earlier, carrying the kind of silence that follows when a man realizes the room has stopped making room for him. Emma did not watch him go. She was looking ahead. Inside the building, the final papers had been signed, filed, and accepted. Nothing dramatic had happened, and that was exactly what made it powerful. No shouting, no pleading, no one chasing her down a hallway to rewrite what she had already decided. Just a clean ending, placed carefully beside a new beginning. Noah held the folder against his side as they walked toward the curb. His presence was steady, unhurried, the kind that never asked her to shrink. When he glanced at her, it was not with rescue in his eyes, but respect. "You did well in there," he said. Emma gave a small, tired smile, the kind that came from deep inside rather than from habit. "I did not need to win loudly," she said. "I only needed to be clear." He nodded once, as if that sentence made perfect sense to him. Across the street, a taxi hissed to a stop. Somewhere nearby, a delivery truck rumbled past, and the sound of the city seemed larger than the little life she had once been told would never amount to much. That was the old lie. The new truth was quieter. It lived in the way she held herself, in the way she no longer apologized for taking up space, in the way her daughter's school bag rested on her shoulder without feeling like a burden. It lived in the schedule pinned to her refrigerator, in the morning coffee she drank before the sun was fully up, in the part-time work that had given her money of her own, in the evenings that no longer belonged to tension. Noah opened the car door for her, and she paused before getting in, letting the moment settle around her. The glass doors of the courthouse reflected the street behind them, the old arguments reduced to shapes and shadows. For a second, Emma saw her own reflection layered over the building, and something in her chest loosened. She was not the woman who had once begged to be understood. She was the woman who had learned to draw a line and mean it. Noah closed the door gently after her, then walked around to the other side. Before he got in, Emma looked back once, not at the courthouse, not at the man who had tried to keep her small, but at the life that had finally become hers by right and by choice. Her phone buzzed in her bag. A message from her daughter. "Can you make it to the recital on time?" Emma smiled, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "Yes, I will be there." No hesitation, no uncertainty, just a promise she could keep. When Noah started the car, the engine hummed low and calm, and the world outside the window moved on without demanding anything from her. The sky had softened into evening, and the first lights in the windows across town began to glow like quiet witnesses. Emma leaned back against the seat, her hand resting lightly on the folder in her lap, and for the first time in years, she felt no need to look over her shoulder. The boundary had held. The peace had stayed, and in the stillness that followed, she understood something simple and lasting. She had not built this life to survive him. She had built it to belong to herself.